morning meeting of Personnel, Audits, and Animal Welfare Committee to order. Myself and Councilmember Bonin are present, and so we have a quorum. If we could begin with public comment, and we will take 2 minutes on the combined items and 1 minute under general public comment. And if one is not able to stay on topic, you'll get one brief warning. If you continue off topic, we will move on to the next speaker.
Mr. Chair, there's nobody on the queue.
Oh, that sounds suspicious. Do you have any way to check to confirm that we have no speakers?
There's nobody in the waiting room that I can see. And I would have gotten an email from Dan Gus.
Well, if we have no public speakers, the public hearing is closed. And I'd like to ask that we take item number 1 and item number 11 as consent without objection.
Goodbye.
Well, somebody objected, but it sounded automated. If we could open the roll on those 2 items.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Koretz?
Aye.
Councilmember Bonin?
Aye.
Very good.
So that item is passed. Item number 2.
Item 2, continue from February 3rd, 2021. Personnel Department report relative to proposed letter of agreement modifying the special memorandum of understanding on commute options and parking to temporarily suspend parking fees.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Stephen Montagna. I'm the Chief of the Benefits Division in the Personnel Department, and I'm here to represent the Personnel Department on this item in our role, which is to provide support to the city's Joint Labor Management Committee that works on commute options and parking issues. So with me are the chair and vice chair, Patty Huber from the CAO's office and Carmen Hayes Walker from ASME. What I can do is introduce this report and recommendation, and then we're happy to take any questions. The Personnel Department administers parking benefits for city employees in accordance with the terms of a special MOU that was created to provide for a range of transportation benefits that includes parking. The special MOU also indicates how much employees pay for parking. We administer about 6,000 permits, and that's for about 22 lots. Since March of last year, we've experienced all of the extraordinary circumstances resulting from the city's response to COVID-19, including the launch of widespread telecommuting. And with so many people working from home, many of those with parking permits were not parking regularly at our lots, which freed up a great deal of extra capacity. On the other hand, many employees who were required to come to work but did not have permits saw that there was this extra parking capacity and asked if they could park. In response, in March, General Services opened up many of the parking lots to employees to park and to be able to do that just by showing a city ID. They didn't have to actually pay for parking. At the time that was envisioned as a temporary measure, I don't think anybody at that time could have anticipated that the present circumstances would have gone on as long as they did. Some of our members began expressing concerns about paying for parking while others were not. We raised this issue with the Joint Labor Management Committee, and they created a subcommittee and worked on crafting a response, the terms of which are included in this proposed letter of agreement, which is part of this report. The LOA basically provides that parking fees would be suspended for a period of 6 pay periods upon its adoption. The jail and CCOP felt that this represented a good balance of all of the various considerations. It provides some relief for those paying for parking now, in recognition that a large majority of them are not really using their parking permit very often, but they also felt that sort of limiting it to 6 pay periods was reasonable in terms of their review of the ride-sharing trust fund. And just so you know, the ride-sharing trust fund is basically set up to take in parking revenue and use those monies to pay for transportation benefits. The jail and CCOP, their plan is to reassess the parking situation after we complete the suspension and sort of look at everything that's been done and where things are at in terms of what's happening with people coming back to work, and there would be the opportunity if they felt it was prudent to provide for additional period a parking fee suspension by revising the LOA. So with that as an introduction, we're happy to take any questions.
I have a question. What are the spending guidelines for the ride-sharing trust fund that would fund this? And are there time limits for fund allocations?
Well, in terms of money going out, the limitations are really that it needs to be related to our transportation benefits. So if we're going to be providing incentives in some way, shape, or form to our employees, that's the limitation. There are certain costs that relate to the sort of the overall administration of the program that can also be included. This is actually what this change would do is basically impact the revenues coming in. So it would reduce for the 6 pay periods the parking revenue that would otherwise be coming into the trust fund.
And I know at the end of this period, we'll look at whether or not to extend it. Are there any factors that we're looking at in terms of whether we extend the suspension of parking fees?
I think the biggest one, and we've all been sort of waiting on this, is to see how expectations are evolving about people coming back to the office and working at city work sites more actively. That will, as more people are coming back, that will probably at some point then General Services would need to, we would expect that there would be some changes made to the current policy, which is allowing the people to basically park only having to show their city ID. So that sort of being able to navigate from the world that we have been in since last March to the new world of people coming back and working more actively in their offices and office buildings, I think is the most important thing that will be looked at.
Hopefully a lot of people will be vaccinated and be back at work by then.
Right.
Mr. Bonin, any questions?
No, sir, thank you.
All right, well, if there's no questions, I recommend that we approve the Personnel Department's report and the recommendations therein. So if we could have a roll call.
Yes. Councilmember Koretz?
Bonin, aye.
And Councilmember Koretz. Sorry.
Koretz, aye.
Okay, very good.
That motion passes. Item number 3.
Item 3, continue from October 14, 2020. CEO report in response to motion, Bonnet Koretz, relative to exempting the Emergency Management Department from the hiring freeze to fill certain vacant positions. This matter has also been referred to the Budget and Finance Committee.
And if we could ask representative from the CAO for an update on the review and consideration by the Managed Hiring Committee for these 3 EMD positions.
Hello, Elaine Duong from the Office of the CAO. In overview, on October 14th, the call committee considered a motion to exempt 8 positions within EMD, and subsequent to that, EMD revised the request to 3 positions. And subsequent to this report back, on December 2nd, 2020, the MHC approved the hiring process for 1 vacant EMC1 position and 1 vacant EMC2 position. And Melissa Velasco, also from the Office of the CAO, and I are available for any questions you may have.
So this is somewhat of a new process. So 2 of the positions were approved. Will the 3rd one come to this committee?
So at this juncture, all the council subsequent to the action of the Managed Hiring Committee instituted a hiring moratorium, which stopped all hiring citywide. As part of that action, therefore, the remaining position that was requested by EMD was effectively halted as part of that process. So because of the hiring moratorium citywide that was approved as part of the 2nd FSR, at this juncture, EMD has only had approved the 1 EMC1 and the 1 EMC2. And this is Melissa Velasco with the CAO.
My understanding of the process is that if a position is not approved, that the council then gets to weigh in on consideration, so that would come to PAW committee and then to the full council.
Right. Subsequent to the approval of the recommendations regarding how the Managed Hire Committee worked, the council approved the overall hiring moratorium, which effectively stopped the entire the managed hiring process.
I would say that would be certainly in contradiction with the opinion of the council. So I'd ask for a report back at our next meeting on the exact sequence of how that happened and what we need to do to once again undo direction in contravention of what we had already clearly expressed as intent. Mr. Bond, would you like to weigh in on this as well?
Yeah, I would. I mean, you know, Mr. Kretz and I spent a lot of years on the Budget and Finance Committee, and we both spent a lot of time talking about the Emergency Management Department. And I've got to say, as bad a situation as we are in, there's no cut that baffles me more than the cuts in Emergency Management Department. At a time when, you know, neighborhoods of Los Angeles are at greater risk of fire, at a time we live in a city that is prone to earthquakes and mudslides. We're in the middle of a pandemic where EMD is activated, and we're going to need them to activate even more in order to ramp down from the pandemic. I just don't get it at all. I really don't. I get that there's a short-term cost savings, but it's going to be a disastrous consequence and expense later. Not if, but when we face an emergency, because it's inevitable, particularly in Los Angeles. So what I would like to know, and this may be sort of what Mr. Kretz is getting at in his report back, is what the hell do I need to do to reverse the decision? I mean, is it as simple as making a motion to make an exception to the hiring moratorium to backfill these positions and, you know, save lives?
So the current action of the council and mayor was to approve the hiring moratorium. So if there were to be a request for an exemption to that hiring moratorium, it would require similarly a action of the council and mayor. So if the council and mayor were to approve additional hiring for EMD as an example, then obviously that would take precedence over the current city hiring moratorium.
Right. The council imposed the moratorium. The council can make an exception to the moratorium, right?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, and I suspect this was done sort of without the council really being aware of what it entailed, because we had set up a relatively clear process of what would happen if the managed hiring committee did not approve positions that were requested. And so that step was to go to the PA committee and then go to council. The council had just passed that, and apparently something else was snuck in to do exactly the opposite. So we will be introducing something looking to undo exactly what we did and reinstate the exact process that we used to have, whereby you would be reporting to us that managed hiring had approved 2 positions and had denied 1, and we would be voting on whether to forward that one to, I believe it was Budget Committee and then Council. Or Council directly. I forget the exact process, but we will plan on working to reinstate that process.
I understand, sir. At this exact moment, the Managed Hiring Committee is not meeting because as part of the second FSR, the council directed the Managed Hiring Committee to no longer meet. So at this point in time, the whole process has been on hiatus, but obviously that is, a policy decision for the council and mayor if they would like to reenact a hiring process.
So you're saying that these 2 positions came in under the wire before the managed hiring process was completely eliminated, so no hiring could be done.
These positions were approved prior to the council's action to institute the hiring moratorium, and my understanding is EMD is in the process right now to hire these 2 positions, the ones that were approved, the EMC1 and EMC2.
Yeah, my understanding was EMD still needed us to backfill 2 additional vacant EMC1 positions.
There are additional emergency management coordinator positions that are vacant in EMD right now. Those positions are positions that were vacated through the Separation Incentive Program, the SIP program. Just for your awareness, one of the reasons my understanding is that the Managed Hiring Committee did not approve those positions when they were requested was because they were vacated through the SIP program. And it is anticipated that the city will be eliminating positions citywide associated with those that were vacated as a result of the SIP program. So that would obviously be the position elimination decision as part of the budget process for the upcoming fiscal year. But that was the reason why the Managed Hiring Committee was hesitant to approve hiring of any additional positions because of the sort of uncertainty as to whether or not those positions would be continued to be authorized next fiscal year because they were vacated as a result of the SIP program.
So there's 2 separate tracks here. I think Mr. Koretz wants to undo the elimination of the process that he and the council felt still existed and was short-circuited by the moratorium. But I actually want to get back to the original intention of my motion, which was to exempt EMD from the full brunt of these layoffs. We can't, and I know you're just implementing what's there, so I'm not faulting you by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just a matter of reality that we can eliminate as many positions as we want or as we need, but we can't eliminate the risk of a wildfire or an earthquake, and we have yet to eliminate the risk of the pandemic. So I still would like to move that we backfill the 2 additional EMC1 positions, which would require I understand would require the council to undo what it has done with the moratorium.
Well, I will happily second that motion and move it forward, but I'm not sure, again, where that leaves us until whether we can bypass this process with that motion or whether we need to correct the process.
Yep.
So, council member, I would anticipate as you mentioned, there are sort of 2 issues here. I do believe that if the council were to act on a motion by Councilmember Bonin to approve 2 additional hires for EMD, that could simply happen to exempt them from the hiring moratorium for 2 emergency management coordinator 1 positions. That could happen. And then separately, we could also have a discussion or separate conversation about the sort of overall process for citywide hiring and the city's current hiring moratorium. So I believe those 2 actions could happen, separate paths, the same path, however you would like to proceed with that.
That sounds, Mr. Chair, to me like a reasonable suggestion, particularly in light of the fact that I suspect that the motion I made to restore the positions is going to wind up going to Budget and Finance Committee before it goes anywhere else. So it's a continued discussion either way, I guess.
Yes. All right. Well, I will suggest that we move forward your motion in the process. I having seconded that, and I am not sure what to do with the main motion, if we should just note and file it for now. If we should either just work with the CAO's office offline, or whether we should bring this back to committee at our next meeting. What do you think as the rep of the CAO's office? Which would you prefer?
So just to clarify, the action that the committee is taking is to approve Councilmember Bonin's request to exempt EMD from the hiring moratorium for 2 emergency management coordinator 1s. And then in addition to that, we're happy to work with your office offline to talk about sort of the overall process. But then I do think it would take a separate motion or separate action of the committee to effectively request an action to eliminate the city's hiring moratorium or to request the CAO to report back on the current status of the city's hiring moratorium.
Okay, so we'll have that conversation offline, and if necessary, we'll introduce a motion to take that step.
Okay.
Mr. Clerk, if we could have a roll call on Mr. Bonin's motion.
Yes, Councilmember Koretz.
Aye.
Councilmember Bonin.
Yes.
And this, in summary, the action will be to request the reinstatement of the 2 emergency management coordinator 1 positions for the EMD, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, in substance. Very good.
Thank you. Item 4.
Item 4, continued from August 19, 2020, Personnel Department reports relative to a report back regarding implementation, benchmarks, and hiring goals for the targeted local hiring and strategic workforce development task force.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Cynthia Flippis from the Personnel Department. In quarter 2 of the current fiscal year, which was from October 1st through December 31st, 98% of citywide hires in the classifications used by the Targeted Local Hire Program were hired through the TLH program, which is 47 out of 48 total hires. Departments with the highest number of hires and classifications used by TLH, by the TLH program this quarter include Recreation and Parks, Personnel, Building and Safety, and Fire Civilian. Departments that used the TLH program to hire 100% of classes used by TLH this quarter included those previously mentioned, as well as Lacers and the zoo. At this time, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, it's impressive results, 98% in one era, and then 100% right before that in the classifications for which TLH could be used. So that indicates a very high success rate in adoption among all the departments. How's COVID impacting the percent of citywide hires into these classifications, and how much hiring will be going on now for these positions?
Well, COVID has definitely affected the application intake of the program. the Personnel Department has enacted online procedures to allow applicants to continue applying. As far as department hiring goes, due to the hiring freeze, hiring has slowed down quite a bit. However, the feedback we have gotten from departments is that they continue to use the program when feasible. Those TLH employees that are eligible to telecommute have been telecommuting and completing their on-the-job training remotely. And I believe there was a second part of your question. I'm sorry.
No, it was just how it's impacted and how hiring is proceeding currently. Are any positions allowed to be hired currently, or have we totally shut this off?
No, departments are still requesting to fill vacancies when possible. Now, the targeted local hire program is subject to the hiring freeze. Therefore, departments must go through managed hiring in order to fill vacancies through the TLH program. But hiring has continued.
Which we've just found out, and I don't know exactly when it started, but not long ago, that we have a moratorium on all hiring, so now there's no managed hiring process as well. Mr. Bonin, any comments or questions on this one?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. We could note and file the Personnel Department's reports from July 31st, 2020, November 13th, 2020, and February 12th, 2021. That would be the motion I would make. If we could have a roll call.
Councilmember Koretz?
Aye.
Councilmember Bonin?
Aye.
Very good.
Good, that item has passed. Item 5.
Item 5, continued from February 3rd, 2021, CL report relative to 3 proposed and amended and restated contracts with Acclimation Management Services, Elite Claims Management, and TriStar Risk Management to provide third-party administration services for managing a portion of the City of Los Angeles workers' compensation claims.
And if you could briefly walk us through what this is and give us an overview of the 3 proposed amended and restated contracts.
Sure thing. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Roth with the Office of the CAO. The department's request is for approval of the 3 separate amendments, which were mentioned. These are third-party administrator services contracts to support a portion of the workers' compensation claims. These requests specifically will extend the terms of each of these contracts by 2 years through November of 2022, as well as increase the total compensation by a total of $30 million. These requested amendments are necessary to allow time for the department to complete a competitive bid process, which was initiated several months ago and completed in December of 2020. Our recommendation from the CAO's office is to approve the department's request. I'm available for questions as well as the department.
And what's the status of the RFP in terms of how many proposals were received, et cetera?
Well, I looked at the requests that were submitted. It appeared that there were 6 valid requests that were submitted. 3 of them were the incumbent companies as well, the incumbent contractors.
And has the Personnel Department looked at a new framework for identifying workers' comp fraud and abuse?
If the department's rep, if Tyrone, if you're available.
Yes, Tyrone Spears, Workers' Comp Division. Yes, so in response to the question regarding the fraud, we've established a kind of a fraud assessment committee that comprised of the Office of the City Attorney Special Investigators, as well as a representative from each of our TPAs, as well as our staff and personnel. And we go over and review any red flags of fraud, waste, and abuse, and we develop plans and strategies to address those.
Very good. Mr. Bonin, any further comments, questions?
No, thank you.
All right, well, I would recommend that we approve the CAO report's recommendations. If we could have a roll call.
Councilmember Koretz.
Aye.
Councilmember Bonin.
Aye.
Very good.
That item passes.
Thank you.
And let's hear items 6 and 7 together.
Items 6 and 7 are continued from February 3rd, 2021. These consist of 2 controller reports relative to Proposition HHH.
And if we could have a brief overview from each department, and then I have questions for each, as I assume Mr. Bonin will as well.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm happy to go first. It's Ann Sewell from the Housing Community Investment Department. Seem to be having a hard time keeping my video on today, so apologies. And there it goes again. So at the last meeting, I took up a lot of your time talking about where we were on HHH and answering questions that arose out of the audits. My understanding of what you're hoping for as a report back today from the Housing Community Investment Department was our response specifically to the last controller audits,
Yes.
the ones in 2019 and 2020, fiscal year ending 2018, fiscal year ending 2019. And so I went back to both of those, and you know, in October 2019, the controller issued an audit that had basically 3 findings. One was, I mean, aside from an overall, like, I don't think we're going to get there to our 10,000 unit goal, and things are taking too long and they cost too much. 3 specific findings, which were to the city could put a greater focus on innovative practices and consider using any savings achieved by doing that for temporary shelters, bridge housing, hygiene centers, and other service facilities. 2 was streamline the permitting process and add needed personnel to ensure quicker development approvals and processing. And 3 was centralize accounting responsibility in one city department, referring to the fact that the facilities part of HHH and the housing part of HHH were handled by the CAO's office and the Housing Community Investment Department, respectively. So at the time, our department wrote a response specifically to the controller audit that said, we are going to get there. You know, we always knew that building housing is going to take longer than perhaps some of the shorter term things like opening a congregate shelter. But that we were in the process at the time of putting out what became the Housing Innovation Challenge, which has 16 projects going through it right now for almost 1,000 units that are testing things like modular housing as different ways to save money. And at the time, I'm going to ask my colleagues in planning to talk about some of the streamlining and changes that we've made about quicker planning, development, approvals, and processing, because since that audit was written and now there have been a lot of really great innovations that came through. And the centralizing accounting responsibility would involve centralizing all responsibility for the facilities part and the housing part, and that is not something that we have done. I frankly would look to the CAO's office for any. We've simply divided the homelessness part of the city. You know, the city's homeless coordinator lives in the CAO's office and has been responsible for the facilities part of it, along with her colleagues there. And HCID has done the housing part. And you know, there's certainly conversations about whether we could at some point consolidate those more, but accounting follows overall responsibility, and right now those responsibilities do live in 2 different parts of the city family, and we try to coordinate as much as possible. Would you like me to stop and talk about that audit specifically and talk about planning, or would you like me to also talk about the second audit?
Well, I guess the real key areas I want to dive into are the idea of pulling funding back from projects that are partway through and replacing the funding elsewhere, and on whether having a central accounting function is a good idea.
Great. Okay, so again, apologies for my computer gremlins. I would love to be able to stare you in the eye as I tell you that the idea of pulling funding back from 124 projects that are in process to do housing that will last 55 years and will be the supportive housing that is the end goal, the gold standard of addressing the needs of people experiencing homelessness, for the elusive and as yet unproven belief that we can do something much quicker in interim housing would be a very bad idea. HHH is the only funding that the city has that is dedicated to producing permanent housing for people experiencing homelessness. And we know that it is housing that moves people out of homelessness, and that you are still homeless while you are in a shelter. You just aren't on the street homeless, but you have not been housed. And so this is what we told the voters we were going to do. This is what all is considered best practices in all the cities around the country in terms of having supportive housing. If we have other resources that this council, that this city has invested in, things like a bridge home or matching funds for Project Room Key or Project Home Key, and that's great. We have stood up 2,000 extra congregate shelter beds since we started this, but HHH was specifically designed to be supportive housing, and it's going to be it, and all these projects are in process. We have commitments to them. Your average HHH project, which is really to say your average apartment building project that's going through a city subsidized assisted housing process, by the time it gets its permit and starts construction, it has spent roughly $2 million on pre-development costs. That's on, site purchase and sale agreements to buy sites, and architecture and engineering and development consultants and all the legal work. A lot of that is in, probably $1 million of that is in the last 6 months, but $1 million of that is earlier. And every single one of those projects is in the process of incurring those costs. So, from the end goal of what the city set out to do with HHH to the more pragmatic legal issues, it would be a very bad idea.
Yeah, and I'd have to say, I think it was a well-intentioned suggestion, but not only is it likely to bring a lot of lawsuits from developers that invested money based on good faith working with the city, but I suspect it would send a message for any future HHH-style projects that you can't trust the city. We could just pull the rug out from under you.
I think that's an excellent point, Mr. Chair. I've been doing, not at the city this, but I've been involved in supportive housing and affordable housing for 30 years. And in the olden days, before 2012, the redevelopment agency routinely funded site acquisition when it made a commitment to a project. And if we were to do this, to say that our word is not good when we tell you to go ahead and start working on a project, we could expect that the development community would need us to do things very differently in the future if we were going to. And there's a reason why we're happy that we don't do that. So I think that we would not want to disturb the balance of this public-private partnership in that way.
On an item that on the natural seems intuitively more logical, is there any reason why we wouldn't move forward an effort to formally establish a centralized accounting authority for the program?
So I think the only issue that, let's see, how to be articulate about this. I think that the best way to have accounting be in one place would be to have the functions be in one place, and they aren't. So, the CAO is managing the facilities part of the development and all the contracts and accounting and all that for that, and the housing department really with the oversight of the CAO is managing the rest of the housing part. So I guess that I would really look to my colleagues in the CAO's office and really also bring the controller's office into the discussion as to how we would merge those two while we have those two offices being involved with the records that go into that accounting.
And the streamlining efforts suggested in the third audit, is there more for us to do on that, or is that moving along well on its own at this point?
I think it's going spectacularly, and there's always more to be done. And I know that Lisa Weber and Matt Glesney, her colleague from planning, are here and could talk about it. I think between the supportive housing zoning ordinance and AB 1197, which rescued it from CEQA lawsuit hell, there's been that plus many other things that the department has done that have really moved projects along, and they've got more things that are in the works. So I think it'd be great to hear from Lisa if that's the committee's pleasure.
I think we'll just go from one department at a time, but we'll ask that at a later moment. Mr. Bonin, do you have any questions for this department?
Just a couple. Thanks, Anne, for the presentation and for the great work you're doing. I'm still excited about the get that we got when we got you.
I agree.
On the, I always forget what the hell we call them, but the innovation grant program or whatever we're calling the cheaper, more innovative way to try to build PSH. What is the average cost per unit that we're getting through that program?
So the innovations that were proposed range, and the average, some are financial innovations, some are going to one place for all your funding innovations, and others are things like modular housing innovations. And I think the total development cost per unit that I've seen in that range from 400,000 a unit up to around what the average is right now of 530 a unit in the regular program. Not everything that people proposed is going to prove to be successful. Not all innovations, but I think so for instance, there was a project that went through homelessness and poverty and on to council recently that was using a type of construction material that's supposed to be cheaper, but it's still early stage enough that I think the cost per unit savings was about 15,000. So not going to knock our socks off, but maybe on the second or third round, it would be more. So just, not all innovations are going to be noteworthy. The modular projects that are in the process right now, those are going to be more significant. They'll be down in the low fours instead of the, mid fives, because if you can be ruthlessly standardized and modular, you can definitely get the cost down. And so some of those projects are going to be able to achieve that.
Yeah, it'd be great to see a breakdown on that, because at some point we need to be saying, okay, this works a hell of a lot better, and let's be looking more at this. And I'm curious how the singular funding source model has been. Has that saved money? My perspective is, correct me if I'm wrong, is that when you're doing sort of the traditional methodology, you're cobbling together funding from a half dozen different sources. All of them have their own hoops and hurdles and conditions, and some of them, what's the chicken, what's the egg, which one comes first, and you wind up spending so much time that winds up costing. Does the single source funding result in faster and therefore less costly?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, in our dream world, if we had unlimited amounts of HHH money, and you could make it go really fast by putting in HHH and a bank loan, which anybody can get, you know, in a few weeks, if you've got a decent development history, and maybe tax credits, maybe not, you know, like, so there's a couple of projects that are doing that right now because we're being frugal in our expenditure of HHH. Right now, people who do that are really having to stretch that bank loan to the point where it may be, you know, I'm hoping the innovation isn't that we're taking more risks into the future with the, you know, the stability of the project. So, you know, one thing to consider into the future is do we want to go, you know, higher subsidy limits for the HHH?
Well, and I'm curious the more we learn about that, because it informs my thinking and my advocacy for the city of Los Angeles to start doing social housing. Because I'm longer I'm at this, the more I'm convinced that, you know, the system based on multiple funding sources and tax credits is trying to get an economic system that is not particularly interested in providing housing to begrudgingly provide housing, and we probably need to be in the business of actually owning it ourselves, like they do in other places. You don't need to comment on my if you don't want. We can
trying to muster my best British accent for it, but no, I can't. There is no good British accent. But yes, that's something we're definitely getting ready for that report back, and there's some good opportunities there.
Good, thank you. That's all you needed to say. On the question about sort of the clawback proposal that's been in there, part of my concern representing the coastal district is that it takes so freaking long to get anything done in the coastal district that if we were to claw something back and even try to do something different, it would wind up taking longer than finishing what we've started already. And you and Mr. Koretz have both articulated some concerns with sort of the implications of the clawback. What I'm wondering is, since the idea has been floated, have we heard either concerns or actual situations where projects that have been approved but are still putting their funding together have heard that any of their other funding sources are getting nervous or squirrely because they think the city of LA might potentially pull up?
Yes. I think at some point soon, the council needs to set this issue to rest one way or the other, because what you're alluding to is we're asking developers to spend money and go as fast as possible, and they're like, why would I? You know, I sit on a statewide board of developers and government folks across the state, and I can tell you that people from, you know, places that are not Los Angeles would be joyful that we weren't asking for our fair share of tax credits and other things to go with it. So it's a matter of a lot of talk, not just at home, but, you know, throughout the state. You know, we would even be thinking about that.
Yeah. That was my concern, because I know so many projects that are partially there and they're waiting on one more source of funds that they're applying for, and I don't want those potential funders, if it's the last piece of the puzzle, to get squirrely and then wind up inadvertently delaying something that we think is taking too long to begin with. A final question, and it's sort of about the land use aspect. I mean, we talk about sort of expediting things, and I know we had the conversation in previous committee meetings about Q conditions and T conditions and stuff like that. If we have so many of the Triple H have been built on government property or publicly owned property, at least in my part of town, so we made them work, is they still are going through the entitlement process in many places for, you know, the zone change or the coastal development permit and stuff like that. I guess coastal development permit we can't entirely undo, although they fast-tracked that a bit. Is there something the city could do that basically said, sort of like a master zone change of some sort? I'm not articulating this very well. That essentially said that any homeless housing project or anything that's more than 50% affordable housing automatically gets a zone change, or is that sort of precluded by other law?
I am going to ask our colleagues at planning whenever you're ready for them. I think that's a perfect question for them.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to the planning department next, and if we could get their overall thoughts and ask them to answer Mr. Bonham's zone change question as the first question.
Great. Thank you, council members. My name is Lisa Weber. I'm a deputy director with the Department of City Planning, and I'm joined today by our executive officer, Kevin Keller, and our senior city planner, Matt Glesney. And we're happy to join our HCID colleagues today to provide additional information regarding the planning department's efforts to expedite approvals, both for permanent supportive housing projects as well as 100% affordable housing projects, and to share some of the stats on the approved units and active applications that are currently underway. I'd like to first start by highlighting 3 recent streamlining measures that the department has taken that are in compliance with state regulations. These have effectively removed entitlement steps, CEQA requirements, and opportunities for entitlement and environmental appeals, and have significantly compressed the processing timeline. So first, last September, in September 2020, the department issued a memorandum which clarified that qualifying Senate Bill 35 projects, which requires that at least 50% of all units be covenanted for affordable units, may take advantage of the maximum housing density of the general plan land use designation. And this is true even when the property's zoning designation may further restrict the intensity of development. So this shift will really allow for more affordable housing units to be built ministerially. And one example I'd like to use, and was really the case study for us in preparing this memorandum, was a project in Council District 11 on 8333 Airport Road. And Councilmember Bonin, you may be familiar with this project, but this property was able to take advantage of this provision, and thus has avoided a very lengthy legislative process, which under other circumstances would have required both a general plan amendment and a zone change for a 100% affordable housing project. So
which one was that, Lisa? What address was that?
It was 8333 Airport Road, and we worked very with your staff members, and actually interfaced quite closely with our colleagues at HCD in order to confirm the provisions of this. So this memorandum that we've issued last fall has generated a lot of interest from the affordable housing community. We've received a lot of inquiries in our department's housing services unit. So we're excited to see more projects take advantage of that.
Can I interrupt you for just a second? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I did want to thank you for that, because I think it's the most recent project in my district, and just absolutely rapidly approved. I mean, it's been approved before projects that have been in the pipeline longer. So that's been great. Is there a way projects that are in the pipeline can retroactively avail themselves of that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Sweet.
Don't think we had any others other than that one. But certainly it's an opportunity moving forward. And for that Airport Road project, I believe they still needed to obtain both a density bonus and a conditional use. But it didn't involve the legislative process, which was significant.
Yeah.
The second streamlining measure I want to mention was another memorandum that was issued back in September, where the department clarified that qualifying Senate Bill 35 projects, again, as well as Assembly Bill 2162 projects, and that's for permanent supportive housing projects, will be processed as ministerial or by right. They will not trigger CEQA review, a public hearing, or an appeal process. And prior to this, we call these the SIP projects, the streamlined infill projects. So prior to this memo, we were taking these qualifying SIP projects, the SB 35 and the AB 2162 projects, still through the entitlement milestones, still going through the City Planning Commission, but on a very expedited time frame. Other projects that only required a director of planning approval still would then have to go through an appeal process at the City Planning Commission. So with this memo, it essentially eliminated all of those processes, and it facilitates our ability to take full advantage of the ministerial status of these cases, regardless of the entitlements that are requested, and it essentially eliminates the public hearing process. And so since this SIP memo is released, several projects have been successful in taking advantage of this. And then most recently, last month in January, the department issued a memorandum to establish a ministerial review process for on-menu density bonus requests. So what this does, it allows standalone density bonus projects requesting only on-menu incentives to be processed through an administrative or a ministerial review, and this is all consistent with state law. So those density bonus projects that aren't subject to any other discretionary requests or entitlements would not trigger a CEQA analysis. So this change through this memo eliminates the CEQA review process and any subsequent potential CEQA challenge or CEQA appeal that could be advanced up through to the City Council.
So is that just for homeless and affordable housing, or is that last one for market rate luxury housing as well?
That's for any project taking advantage of density. It's for on-menu density bonus projects. So on-menu density bonus projects will always have a certain percentage of covenanted affordable units as part of that project.
And how low can that be?
Well, the generally what we see is 11%.
Yeah, which is pretty minimal.
I'm sorry, you were asking low in terms of
if a developer wants to skate by and use this just to build a luxury development, how little can they get away with?
It's per state law, so it's compliant with state law. And state law has always afforded jurisdictions the ability to process on-menu or to process density bonus projects ministerially. So I do want to qualify one thing on this, is that while these projects fall within a ministerial umbrella and therefore would not trigger CEQA review, we are still putting these projects through the discretionary process, and that's to be in compliance with our current LAMC requirements. So until such time as our density bonus ordinance is updated and amended, we'll continue to put them through a process which involves issuance of a letter of determination and the ability for that determination to be appealed to the City Planning Commission. So it does still have some public process involved, but does have a ministerial status per CEQA.
So is there any environmental review, or it just doesn't require a full CEQA process?
It is exempt from a CEQA review.
But any environmental review?
That's correct. No environmental review.
I'm not sure how wonderful that is. It's interesting for this process, but I certainly wish it was more limited.
Councilmember, it's Kevin Keller. Just to add to Lisa's remarks, there is no additional CEQA review for the density bonus portion. Our standard city code still requires CEQA review generally for any units of 50 or more. So any larger project going through site density bonus will still have environmental review, but but this was a state law action that we were implementing. Thank you.
Were we required to implement this, or we just had the option to implement this?
I think we're looking at ways to further streamline all of our efforts and to be in alignment with the direction of state law.
Yeah, I wonder if you could send the committee all three of these memorandums.
Absolutely. And these memorandums, just for others participating in this meeting, are all available on the Planning Department's website as well. Just continuing with a few more comments to share, I wanted to highlight two other assembly bills that have been really critical to helping us with our streamlining efforts. One is AB 1197, and Ann Sewell referenced this one. This one focuses on providing a CEQA exemption for any discretionary action taken by the city in furtherance of providing supportive housing and emergency shelters. And we had a recent project last year located in the SNAP in Hollywood called the Enlightenment Plaza Permanent Supportive Housing Project that was able to take advantage of that exemption. And then I also wanted to mention Assembly Bill 1763, which provides a Density Bonus Plus program. And this has additional incentives and density increases for 100% affordable housing projects and some additional provisions beyond that for those 100% affordable housing projects that are located near a major transit stop. And those provisions allow for no restriction in density and additional height, for example. Focusing specifically on the Qualified Permanent Supportive Housing Ordinance. So with the litigation on that ordinance now resolved, we are starting to see projects utilize the QPSH ordinance. And the department has been successful in approving two projects, one located on Figueroa, the next one on Avalon. We do currently have 8 active cases that are undergoing administrative review. And the great thing about this ordinance is the entire processing activity takes place at the Development Services Center, housed in our dedicated Housing Services Unit, and it is an entirely administrative review process. And so start to finish, from the time they first engage with the department to the time that we issue the approval, is about 3 months in length. And that does include the 30-day required notification period that was included as part of that ordinance. I wanted, before I stop talking, just to share some very quick statistics with the committee. So to date, we have approved, over the course of the last 3 calendar years, 10 PSH projects, which have yielded 600 units. And with regards to 100% affordable housing projects, we've had 119 projects approved, yielding 9,044 units, and that's over the last 3 years. And those projects have taken a variety of entitlement pathways to their approvals. With regards to our current pipeline of work with permanent supportive housing projects, we currently have 5 with the Planning Department. All of these are going through their administrative review process, and these 5 projects will yield close to 300 units. And then we have 39 active 100% affordable housing projects that are currently being processed throughout the department, yielding over 2,200 covenanted affordable units. So those complete my comments, and myself and my other planning colleagues are happy to answer any questions you may have.
I think you answered most of my questions. The only one I have additionally is, I know the adaptive reuse ordinance permits ministerial conversion of obsolete commercial structures into live, work, and apartments and hotels, but don't have an option for supportive housing, which I know my office is looking at. Have supportive housing developers identified an amendment to this ordinance as a viable way to reduce their construction costs, and are is there any demand that you're hearing about for this change?
I think I'll shift that question over to either Kevin or to Matt Glesney.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Kevin Keller, City Planning, and thank you, Lisa. Yes, the department is actively, has already started researching the adaptive reuse ordinance. I know the Plum Committee yesterday took up the motion as well. We are looking at a number of implementation options for updating the adaptive reuse ordinance. Currently, as you stated, it is limited in its more by right process to downtown and a few other geographically specific areas. It is limited mainly to commercial to residential conversions. I think there's been a desire to allow residential to residential conversions or even industrial residential conversions. Wanted to clarify, it will always follow the zoning for the site, so housing will not be allowed unless housing is allowed by the zone. But we're looking at that. We're also looking at some of the criteria that were identified in your motion to link some of these streamlining processes to the provision of some covenanted housing, affordable housing provisions there as well. I know Matt Glesney, who may have a closer ear to this, is also on this meeting with us. I don't believe we have any pending sites that may be immediately in play for this, but we do feel, especially with the emergence of the post-COVID recovery, economic recovery, changing use of buildings, perhaps changing patterns of demands of office spaces or commercial spaces, having this tool in place may provide very useful transitions and opportunities for providing both adaptive use and affordable housing in our existing buildings that may or may not be used for other uses. So I hope that's helpful. I will maybe hand it over to Matt Glesney if he has anything he'd like to add from our department.
Sure. Good afternoon, council members. Just really quickly, just point out we have been talking to some affordable developers, supportive housing developers who have shown interest in using the ordinance. And while I think that supportive housing and affordable housing could technically use the ordinance, it doesn't work very well for the unique housing typology that is supportive housing, which is often smaller unit sizes for individuals. There are some provisions in the ordinance, for example, on minimum unit size that just doesn't work terribly well with the supportive housing model. So those are conversations, and I think Kevin and Lisa touched on some other things that we're looking at that would benefit those types of projects. And yeah, this is certainly an important tool we have that's been working, and we'll be happy to look at how we can expand this to cover a wider rate of affordable housing and supportive housing projects. Thank you.
Mr. Vaughn, any questions for planning?
Nope.
One other thing which I thought of, and I'm not sure if we have the auditor from the controller's office, but if we do, if that person would like to speak up and add any thoughts or respond to any comments.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Bob Wingenroth from the controller's office. I think two things. First, for a heartfelt thank you to this committee and to all members that have been speaking today for the great conversation and the commitment to the success of the Triple H program. I just have one specific comment, and it's on the centralization of the accounting function. I think the spirit of that recommendation is this. When our external auditor, MGO, did their initial work, there was not one central place that they could go to get the story. And so I think that if we could look at maybe denoting one of the accounting groups as the lead, and that group, wherever it's located, might be in housing, it might be in the CAO, had an individual that really had their head around what's happening in all the departments. That would really facilitate future audits, as well as we would have accounting professionals that would have an overall, I think, understanding of what's going on in the program. So that's really, I think, what we were hoping for with that recommendation. We understand that it would be difficult to centralize actually the staff into one organization. I think this is just leadership that we're looking for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Mr. Bonin, do you have any other comments on where we are in this?
No, I need to leave for a Metro Committee meeting in a moment or so.
Okay, well, I would then make a motion to note and file the report with the exception of the recommendation that city policymakers should formally establish a centralized accounting authority, as has been described by the representative of the Controller's Office, and to ask as we move this forward that the Controller's Office, CAO, Planning, and HCID all work together to create an appropriate system for council consideration.
Happy to second that.
We could move those recommendations on items 6 and 7.
Yes, Councilmember Koretz?
Aye.
Councilmember Bonin?
Bonin, aye.
That item passes. And we still have a couple more items. If Mr. Bonin, you need to leave before they're done, we'll hear those as recommendations of the chair.
Okay, yeah, I got to take off now. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Item number 9. Excuse me, item number 8.
Item number 8, continue from February 3rd, 2021. Department of Animal Services report relative to the status of the Animal Sterilization Trust Fund and related matters.
Good afternoon. This is Catherine Chico with the Department of Animal Services, and I'm here to present this report on the status of the Animal Sterilization Fund. And also our report included the approval of the prioritization of the spay and neuter services and the granting of the authority for the department to make real-time changes in the number of free and discount certificates that are distributed. I'm happy to report today that when we presented the original report in October, we were projecting approximately $500,000 deficit by the end of the year. And at this time, we are looking at ending the fiscal year with approximately $300,000 in the Animal Sterilization Fund. Over the last month and a half, we have received approximately $200,000 in donations that are being processed specifically for spay and neuter purposes, which, that will really help the fund. The second item in the report is the prioritization of services, and we are seeking to prioritize the services first for the adoption of animals, and because our animals cannot be adopted out prior to being sterilized except for medical purposes. The second prioritization type of service would be for the mobile vans. And these are the services that actually go directly out to areas in the city that we consider desert areas that have very few veterinary services or facilities. So the mobile vans are very critical to reaching different communities. And then the third would be the voucher distribution. Our report also asks for the ability for the department to make real-time changes in the number of discounts and free vouchers that are distributed to ensure that liabilities are not accrued for which the department does not have the ability to provide payment for. And I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
And are you currently in our financial difficulties able to fund all of the mobile vans that you normally fund and all the organizations, or have you had to cut back some of those?
Well, currently we do not have any valid mobile van contracts because they expired and they are being reviewed through the mayor's cost containment measures. We are meeting with the mayor's office because we did get approval for 6-month extension of those contracts, but we need to to work out some of the details. And so we're hoping to get at least one or two of the vans up and running within the next month or two.
That's good. Do we know approximately how many vouchers we have left for the remainder of the fiscal year?
Well, we issue the vouchers and then they are redeemed. I could provide you with the numbers that we have issued year to date. So year to date for this fiscal year, we have issued 17,000 vouchers, and at this time, 7,700 have been redeemed. With the Safer at Home orders, some of the facilities that offer the spay and neuter services, they are backed up because, during the time that the facilities have closed, the number of services they were able to offer was decreased. So some of the recipients of the vouchers need to extend the expiration date of their vouchers. They contact us and we do so to ensure that they're able to use their vouchers. But we normally have approximately a 55 to 60% redemption rate of the vouchers at any given time.
And I assume we only pay for them when they're redeemed, not when we submit them.
Yes, exactly. When they're redeemed, we pay for them.
I wonder if you could give us an overview of what reducing the number of free certificates and discount coupons issued through the program would look like.
On the funding that was available, right now we provide up to 3 free and 3 discount spay and neuter vouchers per household. And depending on what funding is available, we might have to reduce those down to 2 free and 2 discounts, or 1 free and 1 discount. But it would all be based upon the funding, and we wouldn't want to reduce the numbers until we had to. But we just wanted to have the capability to do so that we aren't accruing liabilities.
And how's our private fundraising going in this arena? Do we have hopes for further additional funding from private sources during this fiscal year?
Oh, definitely. Like I initially mentioned, over the last month and a half, we have received over $200,000 in funding for the spay and neuter alone. So we are very hopeful, and this is just the beginning of our fundraising efforts.
And those couple $100,000 come out of our fundraising projects currently?
Yes, they started at the end of December, and a few of them are making their way through because any donation over $25,000 requires commission approval and council approval. So some of those we've received or in the process of receiving while we go through the approval process.
But we're assuming that those all come through and that whole $200,000 is actualized.
Yes. Some of them actually, we received them, but they're being ready to be dispersed to the appropriate account upon approval.
And are we expecting any significant impact in reducing the amount of spay and neuters that we're funding in this fiscal year and possibly next?
Any impact on the spay and neuter surgeries will, impact, our residents and the animal communities. Take, for instance, when the injunction was placed for the community cats, that impacted, a lot of areas in the city. So if we had to reduce the number of spay and neuter vouchers, yes, there would be an impact. And one of the impacts would be the number of animals surrendered into the shelters. Say the owner could not, afford to maintain their animals, and that would have a direct impact on the number of animals entering the shelters, for which the department has to provide daily feed and care and veterinary care and the related costs that go with those.
Well, thank you, and we are glad to hear that we're starting to bring in some private money to help shore up this program, and hopefully we'll wind up with more in the course of this fiscal year. And perhaps even the city will get on better financial footing at some point and be able to help kick in more towards spay and neuter, which we all know is critical to dealing with the overpopulation of animals in the city of Los Angeles. So
Yes,
thank you for your report, and for you and your department and their good work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And so we will note and file item number 8.
Very good.
I don't know if I need to have the roll call since I'm the only
No.
voter. I will just say yes on that.
That's fine.
Item number 9.
Item 9, Department of Animal Services report relative to authorizing a registration fee for maintaining 3 to 5 cats.
Hello, I'm Brenda Barnett, representing the Department of Animal Services on this issue. As you know, there was an ordinance that went through about the same time the EIR went through, allowing LA City residents to have as up to 5 indoor-only cats, and they all must be spayed or neutered. In order for us to be able to keep all the numbers that we need regarding cats, we need to be able to track the number of families who do decide to have over 3 and up to 5 cats. So we're proposing that there be a $10 annual registration fee for anyone who wants to have over 3 and up to 5 cats. And we're also asking that registration fee be put into the Animal Sterilization Fund for the sterilization of cats.
And that's a pretty modest fee. How did we arrive at that number?
Well, the truth is that we selected that number, and we did not know if it would be referred back to the CAO to do a cost analysis. We're certainly open and willing to do that. It could go up or it could go down. But we wanted to make the fee low enough that people would voluntarily comply. There's no way that we have the staffing to go door to door and check on all the kitties. So we wanted to make the fee low enough that people would be encouraged to comply, hopefully just because they really love cats.
Which, of course, if they're having 4 or 5 cats, that would be an indicator anyway. And I think that's such a low fee that we almost can guarantee that that would not be above costs. So I'm not even sure how much of an analysis we'd feel is necessary. I think that's probably a good concept to make it low enough that it wouldn't really be a barrier for anyone. Will there be any penalties to people if they don't pay the fee?
Well, the problem, I think, is how we would know that. And when someone has too many dogs in their backyard, it's pretty clear and pretty obvious to the neighbors that they do, and they can turn them in and let us know. With indoor kitties, that's going to be a little bit more of a challenge. But we certainly are open to recommendations.
Yeah, I suspect that if we publicize the fact well enough that people with 4 or 5 cats need to register, I think that will be somewhat self-enforcing, especially at that small dollar amount. What are your plans to do in terms of outreach and raising awareness of the registration fee?
Well, we do have, now that we have a small marketing team in the department, they put out regular press releases, Instagrams, Facebook posts. So we do have a way of reaching out to the public. We also have a brochure that is distributed that has all of the animal laws on it. And we have that in English and Spanish. So when we distribute that, the cat registration will become part of that once it's approved.
Great. Well, thank you. That's all the questions I have. And we thank you for moving this forward. And we will approve the Department of Animal Services recommendations.
Very good.
Item number 10.
Thank you.
Item 10, continue from February 3rd, 2021. Department of Animal Services report relative to proposed contract extensions with the Amanda Foundation, Lucy Pet Foundation, and Spay for LA for the operation of mobile spay and neuter clinics.
And
Hello,
Ms.
I'm still
Barnett, are you
Barnett
presenting
with
this one too?
Services. Yes, I am, Councilmember Kretz. This is a follow-up in some levels on some of the information that Catherine shared with you before. These spay-neuter vans are our mobile wheels that can get us into the communities. Do not have cars. They do not have any way to get their pet in to be sterilized. You may remember several years back when we first started with the mobile vans, we assigned some of those to the income areas, to the zip codes in the community where people had the lowest possible incomes, were all poverty-based, and didn't have vehicles to be able to move their animals to and from to be able to get them spayed or neutered. And we continue to use the mobile vans in those similar kind of ways where they go where people otherwise wouldn't be able to get their pets spayed or neutered. We consider them critical to our operations to keep animals altered, and we would like to be able to work with the city and the people who on contracts to be able to move these forward and to put these 3 contracts in place. These vendors have been with us for many, many years, and they do excellent work.
And how many providers are on the pre-qualified list?
For the mobile spay neuter, it's the 3, Amanda Foundation, Lucy Pet Foundation, and Spay for LA. And I might say that we had a lot of veterinary clinics went on limited services for during COVID. I will brag a little bit that Spay for LA operated all the way through COVID. They were out on the streets spaying and neutering dogs, cats, and making sure that we got as many altered as possible.
And the renewal term through the mayor's contract review, did they say it was going to be 6 months extension, or is there another period in addition?
Hi, this is Catherine. The approval.
Well, we're asking for a 6-month extension, but we are. Go ahead.
Yes, we were granted the 6-month extension, and we are in the process of seeking permanent contracts, establishment of a new set of contracts for the mobile van.
And what length of time is that new set expected to be?
Those would be 5 years. The initial term would be 3 years with 2 one-year extensions.
Right. All right, well, that's all I have to ask. So thank you for the presentation, and we will approve the recommendations of the Department of Animal Services on this item. Mr. Clerk, do we have any other business before us?
That clears the desk, Mr. Chair.
Well, in that case, we are adjourned.